Do you think the Trump administration has completely miscalculated this war?
Very much so.
Do you think Iran can sustain this long war if the fighting drags on for maybe 2 more weeks?
I think they could sustain it even longer. Only like 27% of Americans, according to polls, support this war. Well over 60% do not. And I have never, ever seen such opposition to a war at the very outset. Obviously, the Kurds, the Baluchis, you have the Azeris and others. And the United States is already talking openly about arming and supporting these groups, and even bringing in some American forces to assist them.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me again is Professor Stephen Zunes. He teaches at the University of San Francisco. Professor Zunes, thank you again for speaking to Fair Observer.
Good to be with you again, albeit not under the best of circumstances.
Right, because the last time we spoke, there's something that you said that has struck with me. You said that Iran would not be like Venezuela. It would be a lot like Vietnam. Do you still stand by that statement?
I don't think I actually used the term Vietnam, but I did note that it could be indeed a protracted war. We're not going to have troops on the ground in terms of bloody counterinsurgency situation. It's not like Iraq. Iran is 3 times the size in both area and population. Unlike Iraq, most of the southern 2/3 of which is quite flat, open desert. Iran is a very mountainous country. It's not something you could easily roll your tanks through. And I don't see, there's already some talk perhaps of bringing in some small number of forces to help certain separatist groups, but I don't see any kind of full-scale ground operations.
Right. The Trump administration, along with the Israeli government, they kicked off this campaign on the 28th of February, and they started off with decapitation strikes. In the first wave of attacks, they took out Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. They were expecting the Iranians to come out on the streets and stand up against the regime. That's not really happened. Do you think the Trump administration has completely miscalculated this war?
Very much so. I mean, some Iranians did come out the street to celebrate, and I don't blame them given the nature of the regime and the Ayatollah's long repressive rule. But the thing about Iran is that it never has been, despite him being the supreme leader, so-called, it's not a matter of one-man rule where you could get rid of the bad guy and then things can open up. Iran is much more of an oligarchy. It is consisting of overlapping interests that have a stake in the system. And in addition to the clerics, and they have people willing to fulfill the late Ayatollah's role, you have some semblance of a republic in terms of a parliament and president, even though they don't have a lot of power. But more importantly, you have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, right, which over the years has usurped more and more power. Indeed, in many respects, Iran is as much a military regime as it is a theocracy. And even though the U.S. has gotten rid of a number of their high-ranking officers as well, they also run pretty deep. So I don't see any kind of regime collapse. And if this is what Trump was thinking, and there's some indications indeed he may have been thinking in these ways, he has apparently felt the need to escalate the conflict, going far beyond some of the top military targets and increasing the bombing government facilities, civilian infrastructure, and indeed civilian neighborhoods.
Right. So do you think Iranians are now more united? Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, generally, when a country is bombed, people tend to rally around the flag, especially as civilian casualties grow. whatever one thinks of the government, and again, most Iranians are very much opposed to it. They're strongly nationalistic people, and with Trump, treating them, like some, a tiny Central American or Caribbean country from the days of gunboat diplomacy 100 years ago, we are talking about a nation of 90 million people. It's been a major power on and off for 2,500 years. There are people who really have a and resent, the fact that they are being targeted. They're certainly not the only dictatorship in the region. They're certainly not the only country that has a nuclear program in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. I mean, Israel, Pakistan, and India actually have nuclear weapons in violation of a series of UN Security Council resolutions. So clearly, they feel like they are being unfairly, singled out. And indeed, during my the recent visit to Iran, the anger at the regime was palpable. But so was U.S. policy, and so were the threats against their nation.
Right, and one thing that we've seen from Iran is that they've actually come out swinging. They've not just struck targets in Israel, but they've struck U.S. bases, allied bases across the region. But the question that I want to ask you is: do you think Iran can sustain this long war if the fighting drags on for maybe 2 more weeks?
I think they could sustain it even longer. They have rejected the possibility of negotiating a ceasefire, which gives some indication that they have a pretty big stockpile in caves inside mountains or wherever they hide them, to roll out and continue firing. And they see this as kind of an existential conflict. There's no holds barred. Now, it may have been a strategic miscalculation of them to have attacked these Arab monarchies. I mean, they're not just going after U.S. bases, which they had every right to do since the U.S. attacked them. I was really struck by NBC News in their interview during the first day of the conflict with the Iranian foreign minister, saying, "How can you possibly justify attacking U.S. bases?" And he was like, "Dude, you guys attacked us first, But but they've been hitting other assets, both military and civilian, not directly related to the U.S. presence in these countries, and that has gotten those nations really upset at them. And I think Iran's calculations is that, look, if you're going to try to bring us down, we're going to try to bring you down. That there's going to be a cost for American aggression, and it's not just going to be Iranians that suffer, but people in Israel and people in allied Arab nations."
Right. Actually, I want to come back to that later, because I want to first talk about Israeli and American strikes. So when this campaign started off, when the war started off, I believe the Trump administration has called it Operation Epic Fury. And the first strikes were all precision strikes. It was against IRGC targets. It was on missile launchers. But now we've gotten these horrific videos of almost carpet bombing Tehran, a city of 10 million people. Why do you think this is happening? Is there a way for the Trump administration to justify this?
It's hard to say. I really think that that it is pure frustration. And obviously the given U.S. support for Israel's carpet bombing of Gaza, which reached genocidal proportions. I don't, and the fact that the U.S. was able to get away with it. Politicians of both parties that supported it got reelected. I think they figure, well, we can support, we can do the same thing ourselves along with our Israeli allies, and we can somehow get away with it. And as far as the Iranians are concerned, I mean, they are aware that already over 1,000 Iranian civilians have died, and that death toll is going to be increasing dramatically if the war indeed continues. I mean, remember, this is a regime that massacred many thousands of their own people. They're willing to sacrifice large civilian casualties by continuing to fight. So neither side has the moral position in terms of the sacrifice of civilian lives, and trying to avoid that, because both sides, believe they are ready to continue indefinitely.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to dig deeper on that because yes, of course, we know about the United States and Israel. They've got strong air forces. They've got everything. They've got refuelers. They've got AVACs, but still, they're not able to, you know, have as many interceptions as they'd like, especially when it comes to Iranian ballistic missiles. There are Pentagon reports saying that the United States is short on interceptor missiles, especially when it comes to defending some of the Arab allies. And then on the other side, you've got the Iranians. They've almost lost their entire navy. In fact, an Iranian frigate was submerged using a U.S. submarine just today. And you've got the Pentagon giving these press conferences saying that Iranian ballistic missile launches, Iranian drone launches have drastically reduced in the last 4 days. What do you think? What is happening? Are both sides kind of looking at this and thinking that they've entered a war of attrition now?
Yes, I think both sides are hoping that one or the other will, run out of some of the key kinds of military equipment to continue this. It's also possible we could have what you call a herding stalemate, where both sides finally figure out that this isn't getting, they're not achieving the goals, or the cost is too much, and they'll decide to agree to a ceasefire with no particular conditions, and both declare victory. But I think it is fair to say that I think the United States grossly underestimated Iran's military capabilities and its ability to continue to fire missiles and the like, even after significant losses. Perhaps I should say, maybe a bit of an overstatement. I think my guess is that the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and many people in the military brass did recognize this, but Trump insisted on going ahead anyway.
Right. And contrary to the 12-day war that we had in 2025, this time Iran has actually struck multiple US bases in the Gulf. They've also fired multiple drones at the UAE. I think the UAE has, the United Arab Emirates has faced the most number of ballistic missiles and drones. Why the UAE?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's hard to find a legal or strategic rationale really on one level. I mean, the UAE was not pushing for war against Iran. They do have some small U.S. Military installations there, but not like Bahrain, which hosts the Fifth Fleet, or Khattar, that has that huge military Air Force base there, or Iraq, that's has been hosting U.S. troops for quite a few years. I think perhaps the UAE symbolizes some of the worst excesses of an Arab Islamic state and its ties to global capitalism and the United States. That they have the sense that in all the glitz of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, nowhere in the region is safe as long as the U.S. continues bombing.
Right. So that's where I'm confused, because when you look at countries like the UAE, you look at Saudi Arabia, look at Qatar, you look at Bahrain, they're all considered allies of the United States. They've got weapons. All their fighter jets are mostly from the United States, and they are being hit by Iran. Why aren't they joining this strike force against Iran?
I think the main reason is that the United States and Israel are bombing the hell out of Iran. They couldn't really add a whole lot more to it. It's certainly not for a lack of having the weaponry. In fact, both Saudi Arabia and even UAE actually have a higher military budget than Iran does. That's why all this insistence that we had to support these autocratic monarchies, despite atrocities in Yemen and elsewhere, in order to protect themselves, from Iran, it was pretty dubious. But I I think they also recognize that even though Iran is not popular in that part of the world, that their public sentiment among the Arab population doesn't like to see thousands of Muslims being killed. They don't like to see the U.S. and Israel teaming up to subject a Muslim nation to such destruction and suffering. They want to keep hey, we'll defend ourselves, but we're not necessarily endorsing this war. Indeed, virtually all of them had warned the United States that just this kind of thing would happen. They didn't want it to happen to them, and they tried to persuade Trump not to do it. But obviously, he went ahead anyway.
Right, and we're clearly seeing that because protests are increasing in Qatar and in Bahrain. There are protests in Iraq. There are protests in Pakistan. There are protests in my country, in India. The Shia population is clearly unhappy with how the United States and Israel have launched this campaign in Iran. Do you think we're going to see a spillover effect that that nobody is really catering for, because the Shia population is angry across the world?
Yes, we're particularly seeing this in Bahrain, where people are actually cheering when they saw missiles slam into the U.S. naval base there. And remember, this is a country that had a very impressive pro-democracy movement that was predominantly, though not exclusively, led by the country's Shia majority against the autocratic Sunni monarchy. I mean, despite claims that Iran was behind it, this was a sincere, broad-based pro-democracy movement. The Shias in Bahrain are not pro-Iranian. I mean, there was some initial excitement at the time of the revolution, but since then, as the true nature of the Iranian regime has revealed itself, their support has declined substantially. But again, I think people are making a distinction between the regime and the Iranian population, and as they see the death and destruction increasing, the resentment at the United States and Israel, and their country's collaboration with the United States, and in a couple of cases with Israel as well, I think it's going to increase.
Right, Professor Zunes, You've been a scholar of this region, of Middle East, of Iran for years. You've been to Iran. Now that the country doesn't have Khamenei as the supreme leader, what happens next? How can you tell us about the process of how the next supreme leader is elected?
Well, Khamenei had been sick for some time. He was 86 years old, frail. So there had been talk of succession for some time. A couple of the candidates were killed along with him, but the clerical establishment there is pretty big, and there are some noted leaders, including his second son and some others that could get in that position. But in wartime, I think ultimately, again, it's the Revolutionary Guard that is ultimately going to be in charge. But what's disturbing to me, and it's becoming increasingly apparent, that the United States was not just going after the clerical leadership, not just after the military leadership, not just people associated with the regime, but they appear to be targeting almost any potential leadership in the country, including those in the opposition. Some of your viewers may remember Mir Hussein Mousavi, the former prime minister, who won the 2009 election against Ahmadinejad only to have it stolen from him. And he was seen as the leader of the Green Revolution, the 2009 popular unarmed insurrection that was suppressed pretty brutally by the Iranian government. And he's been in house arrest ever since. The other day, the United States actually targeted the residential compound where he was living. They've also gone after other leaders, including former President Ahmadinejad, who was killed the other day. And I've heard reports from a British academic I trust, who who's talked about how it appears that leftist oppositionists are being targeted as well. So that some people speculate that if you get rid of all those folks, that might leave an opening for the Shah's son to return. But given that it's unlikely that the regime can be overthrown in that regard, and the United States handpick a successor, I'm afraid really what the goal here is to turn Iran into a failed state. Remember that nearly half the population of Iran is not Persian. You do have groups that have rebelled at times. Obviously the Kurds, the Baluchis. You have the Azeris and others. And the United States is already talking openly about arming and supporting these groups, and even bringing in some American forces to assist them. And so perhaps the U.S. and Israeli goal here is basically to turn Iran to a failed state, to weaken it into competing ethnic rivalries within the Persian population. To have the leftists, the monarchists, the Islamists, fighting each other amid the ruins. And indeed, I think that's ultimately what this goal, the ultimate goal of the war is about, that to weaken Iran so much that they are no longer a deterrent and alternative to U.S. hegemony. And that this is really a pretty explicit imperialist war.
Right. But given how you've explained how Iran is structured, it doesn't seem as top-down as it's being made out to be. In fact, IRGC looks like I believe it has more tentacles than one can even imagine. So do you
very
think
much so? Very much. I mean, they own huge sections of industry. They run everything from tourist hotels to technical colleges. I mean, it is a they're very powerful. And indeed, that's why civil resistance, which I'm a big fan of and I've written about in many countries, has failed so far, because the Islamic Republic is the first government to be faced with massive civil resistance that came to power themselves through massive civil resistance and the uprising against the Shah. And, for example, one of the key issues in the final days of bringing down the Shah was a strike by the oil workers, obviously critical for the economy, and also the customs workers. That was critical for getting anything in and out of the country. Well, the oil workers union is infiltrated top to bottom with so-called Islamic committees that are, loyal to the state, and the customs is controlled as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Revolutionary Guard. And so they have really built up these kinds of mechanisms to make it very difficult for a comparable civil insurrection to bring them down. And as we noted earlier, that is even less likely now that the country is under attack from the outside.
Right, but you've also explained what the goal could look like, which is, kind of like the Balkanization of Iran. You've got the Azeris, you've got the Balochis, you've got the Kurds, you've got other ethnic groups who might get into like a free for all when it comes to fighting against the IRGC. Do you think that is actually possible, or do you think the IRGC is just so strong that they will be able to crush these smaller rebellions?
I don't think these rebellions will ultimately succeed, but it will certainly lead to chaos. It will certainly undermine stability in the region. I mean, under the Bush administration, the United States did arm the Baluchis and the Kurds, and literally on the first day of the Obama administration, he cut that off, and once again labeled them as terrorist organizations, because even though he was, of course, hostile to the Iranian regime, like every other president, he recognized that they were a destabilizing force, and it was contrary to American interests to encourage that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. So, in case this war prolongs further, and the Trump administration says that they started off with this will be done in 3 days, to now they're looking at probably 8 weeks. In case it reaches 8 weeks and probably even more, do you think this is the beginning of the end of Donald Trump's political career?
Well, certainly it's not going to help him. They're already, the Democrats are overwhelmingly opposed to this. A sizable minority of Republicans are opposed to it. And this is what's really striking, because even in controversial wars, such as the Iraq War, when public opinion was divided beforehand, once the war started, at least initially, people were in favor of it. It's about, support our troops, and maybe the president knows what he's doing, and they give him the benefit of the doubt and this sort of thing. But already you're finding only like 27% of Americans, according to polls, support this war. Well over 60% do not. And I have never, ever seen such opposition to a war at the very outset. And as this war drags on, and as tales of civilian casualties increase, as likely American casualties are relatively small, but still significant in the eyes of the public, increase, and the economic ramifications are increasingly felt, you will see a shift. Let me mention the economic ramifications briefly. 20% of the world's oil goes to the Strait of Hormuz, which is effectively closed at this point.
Right. And
Iran has been attacking oil facilities in the Gulf. And we know, and already you're seeing the prices of petrol going up. But it's not just what you pay for at the pump. Petroleum is critically important. Everything from fertilizer to plastics and the like. And we've seen how when oil prices rise, it can slow down the economy overall. I mean, there's really is a potential of a global recession coming out of this. And we saw it happen in Asian markets so far. I mean, there is, and elsewhere, there is a, this is also going to impact Americans, where our economy is somewhat stagnant. Affordability is like the #1 issue in the minds of American voters. Trump's tariff policies certainly haven't helped either. So the political impact could be quite significant.
Right. And very quickly before we wrap this up, what could an American victory look like, and what could an Iranian victory look like?
At this point, it's hard to see any of them having what could reasonably be called a victory. I mean, I think of a late American congresswoman, saying, you can no more, win a war than you can win an earthquake. And, that may not be true of all wars, but I think this is very much the case here, because, again, the human toll is going to be enormous. The financial toll and environmental toll is going to be enormous. I mean, if there was by some miracle the regime does fall and it's replaced by something that has some semblance of credibility, that would obviously be a victory for the United States. But I really don't see that realistically happening. Iran could eventually force the United States to stop the war short of their more grandiose goals, and they could declare victory for that. But again, at what cost, given the enormous destruction and the one-sidedness of this conflict?
Right. Brilliant. Thank you, Professor Zunes, for speaking to Fair Observer. As always, it's been a pleasure.
My pleasure as well.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.